marae. We would be doing kapahaka, and he would have just finished his business paper, or maybe midway through his business paper, and he'd be meeting up with a colleague there. And it was at the Pullman Hotel, then the Hyatt, that him and his colleague, who had skived off for halfway through his business paper, fleshed out the very ideas for Māori Maps. So kind of full circle and fitting for me to be situated in there. And the last thing I'll do is, I think I did this in 2018 when I first attended FOSS4G, is I've changed my title. So this is same thing, similar thing, but similar ideas, but more appropriately, we're going to start talking about the way everything that you do as FOSS4G members or attendees or in your own geospatial worlds, and how that translate over to the people, the users, the people like me. I'm almost 2010, 2009, I think, it was when I first entered the Māori Map space. People still think, well, 16 years on from that, maybe 17, people still think I know anything about maps. So I've tricked everyone so long. So our new title is called Aotearoa's Data of Belonging. It's the way that where you see tiles, where you see code, where you see layers, where you see all the different meaningful ways to interpret and display map information on a usable interface. I see relationships, I see story, I see history, I see connections, I see affiliations. And that's sort of the theme of what I'm going to talk about, is how does a GPS coordinate translate over to a whole realm of meaning for the Māori, for the marae communities of New Zealand, for Māori Maps and what we do. I want to ask Alex or I'm going to ask Alex to give me a little thumbs up when I've got 5 minutes to go. So briefly, I'm a Māori boy from a small village called Oromahoe in the Bay of Islands. If you've got time to get out of Auckland City, get up there. If you've got time to do it over summer, even better. First 18 years of my life basically spent within the shadow of that little village marae there. We'll get into what a marae is soon. But for the majority of those 18 years, that forest behind and the swamplands below, that was home. As we mentioned, we've already pointed out Ngāti Whātua Rākei. It's appropriate to start there because their story, that data, the coordinates, the pin that's dropped over top of their marae, hosted on our website, means so much more than that. It tells of a story of land loss, of aggressive alienations by Crown, of council confiscations, of protest. It tells a story of our pride, people, the pride of people, the pride of wider communities, the contestations that happened in landmark cases around the Treaty, the Waitangi Tribunal. It tells of a story of rebalancing the ledger through settlement, through negotiation. So it's appropriate we start there, as our first acknowledgements must always begin from that space of home, from that space of home people. So I've phrased this first sort of part, and there's three parts to this story, these stories. Our source of tribal code kind of talks about the epicenter, the quintessential core of what it means to be Māori. While today you'll see TV, Māori cultural performances, you'll hear the language. The source of everything that Māori Maps is, the source of everything that Māori is comes from this one kind of seemingly bespoke, seemingly obscure, a collection of wood, of land, of fence lines. It goes all the way back into the Pacific. I'm going to take you back about 3,000, 2,000 years to this thing here. This is the first kind of marae. The reason why I'm going to have to spend a little bit of time on this, because it's not much point in understanding what we do without understanding what marae are. Mark Oram, the Deputy DVC, he mentioned the arrival of a waka, a voyaging canoe at Ōkaho Bay just down the road. About 2,000, maybe 1,500 years ago, many of those voyaging canoes would have departed this very particular marae called Tapu in the Pacific, carrying with it generations of knowledge of stars, star systems, the rising, the falling, bird path migrations, swell movement, all there combining, codified into a way that got these people from way into the Pacific all the way up to Hawaii, as far west and far east, as Rapa Nui, and as far south as Aotearoa. Once here, they transformed. Marae underwent a significant key transformation, becoming integrated with the landscape. This one here is my pā, my volcanic cone up north in the Bay of Islands, called pōwhiri. Up until the 1830s and 40s, they were what we know as marae today. They housed communities. It was from there where all the carbohydrates, the protein sources, were returned and redistributed amongst the community. They functioned the same way up until at least the 1870s. And during that time, a new transformation would occur with marae. After large-scale land alienations in New Zealand, beginning around the 1860s, marae became integrated into large meeting houses, the ones you probably know today or have seen today. The wharenui, the meeting house, inherited its status alone, and it became its own status, and it became kind of synonymous with what a marae looks like. And after those alienations, they were probably all that was left in many cases. And this kind of just covers a quick snapshot using a quite nice painful map of how Māori land had transferred out of Māori title over the subsequent decades up until at least the 1940s. It's this context that's important because it's kind of the reason why Māori Maps came about. And we'll get to that soon. But you all might be familiar today with this image here, or images like it, of marae. And today they represent a courtyard, a plaza, fenced off with a meeting house, sometimes carved, sometimes not. And it's this image, or these images, synonymous with our current day marae. So these institutions, they carry with them the language, the knowledge, affiliations, codified relationships, but most importantly, they are the context behind which host people and visitors are created. It is the ultimate space in which a home community who have been on this landscape for generations can welcome and continue to welcome new people and build relationships and foster new connections. So in some respects, FOSS4G is providing that context in its own way from across the world. One of those previous slides talked about the large-scale land alienations. Up until the 1940s, after World War II, 1950s, a lot of Māori who participated in the World Wars stayed away, travelled beyond tribal horizons, where sanitation and health problems plagued a lot of these Māori communities. Many, as you would expect, left, and is happening in Pacific communities and happening right throughout the world, left my people. Many of them came to Auckland or as far south as Dunedin to work in factories, meatworks, shear gangs and on dockyards. This has been the case for about 3 or 4 generations. These two photos here tell a very interesting picture. The first one on my right, on that right, we mapped that in 2009. It's no longer standing still. And that one, this one here, over 100 years old, stood idle in the middle of a paddock. So we created Māori Maps. The founder, Paul Tapsell, he was actually touring a museum exhibition around the country. And the point of the exhibition was to actually visit many marae on the way and tour some of these ancestral belongings through these marae. But they kept getting bloody lost. Down gravel roads, you'd see the hallmark of a marae community, gorse and broken fences. And he lamented the days when they had an auntie or an uncle in the passenger seat that could point you in the right direction without hesitation, mentally mapping whole entire regions without want for a map. And as someone as connected as Paul was to his community, he kind of thought about the generations, 3 or 4 generations that had also been growing up away from their own home, and came up with this idea for a marae map, a Māori map. So it took all of 7 years, I think, to do this. And in doing so, there was just stark reflections on how he grew up and how I grew up, and the nuanced way of interacting with the landscape in the village, the way you can duck in and out of weather-boarded homes, the familiar faces, unlocked doors. That very way of being was being lost and is being lost. Yeah, so over the course of 6 years, beginning 2009, when we started way at the very top, we began a series of excursions over 6 years to put marae back on the map. These centres, these bastions of knowledge and whatnot. A lot of, over 20,000 kilometres, a lot of cups of tea. We'd pick an area, would have to do maybe 26 in that time, and if we got caught by one community who just wanted to talk, maybe it would take 2 hours just to talk about our idea with them. We'd quickly and steadily have to rush to do the remaining 20. As you can see, some of them were not so easy to get to. Rolled up shorts became a bit of a signature for us, carrying the GPS. Old Navman, which still exists to this day, over rivers and through swamps. I think we got to taste the best fish and chips across the country. And each time we would bring, usually my father sitting there, who was the elder that would take across these trips to provide us that cultural guidance from an elder perspective. And then we'd take the guy in the red who would make connections, would have 1 degree of separation, until we created Māori Maps. I think our first slogan was "Your Guide to Our Home." It was more outwardly facing. It was a brand that acknowledged multiple dimensions of being New Zealand, and these were the first institutions of it. Funnily enough, the first idea was to produce a book, an atlas. This is actually taken from the assignment that Paul did for his business paper when he was fleshing out the ideas. We thought that was quite cool. This is 2010, 2009. So internet connections here were pretty poor. As bad as it was within urban environments, most marae didn't even have an email address. So the idea was quite novel. We couldn't even think about a website. Lo and behold, thank God we didn't go down that route, because the number of edits I would be doing over the years, just keeping this information relevant and up to date. So this is a blast of the past for me as well. I haven't seen some of these images in so long. This is our first iteration of our website. No map there, but the idea was to have a repository where we would have up-to-date contact information for marae, basic affiliations of the community, hapu and iwi as we would know them, helping the descendant create a picture if they only had maybe a name to go off, or if they only broadly knew where they were from. Also just to provide a basic map. 2011 hit. This is not too long after FOSS4G, actually. We were with a provider at the time, and we created our first kind of map interface. No, sorry, this is 2011. This is once we start finding our brand, finding a recognisable icon that reflects marae. So once again, yeah, a lot of cups of teas, a lot of manual GPS point entry and iteration. And then fast forward our collaboration with Orbika and a good friend, Santosh, is in the room. We came up with this solution. This is my own home, marae in Oromahue. But we kind of departed, unfortunately, from the signature icon. Until more recently, as of September last year, we've got our latest iteration. And the purposes of iteration was to keep things relevant, keep things reflecting our principles and ideas. But the sum of all this is to tell you a story that 787 marae were mapped over this time, that we've transformed much as the marae have themselves through different iterations, mainly because the inevitable corrections that were needed constantly. I think I get about 2 corrections a week, perhaps, from marae themselves, either updating the imagery, updating the contact information, updating or correcting affiliations. The connectivity back in 2009 was, as you would think, horrendous. I think I was charged with trying to reach out to every single marae, so many failed postal boxes, many failed phone calls or disconnected. And we're still finding that kind of is the theme today, is maintaining these connections to these institutions is quite hard. But lo and behold, Māori Maps was the first database, the first map, the first comprehensive photographed resource for ancestral marae of Aotearoa. Our demarcating note was that we focused on tribal marae. There are other forms of marae in the country, urban, institutional, and governmental. We focused on the ethic of connecting descendants with their ancestral communities, and we've kind of maintained that vision. Nowadays, we're exploring the possibility of opening that up. And then up until recently, the steady kind of growth that we've been experiencing is about 30,000 monthly visits to the site without any sort of decent form of public publicity. And this is all to connect the almost 1 million now Māori to their ancestral homes. Our data of belonging. So who are we? TPNT, Te Pōtiki National Trust. I think that was the very first step, was we wanted to create something that would ensure the longevity of this, before we had even created Māori Maps. We created a governance structure that had, as I mentioned, elders, making sure us wayward Pōtiki would not venture off and do something that would be deemed culturally or communitally unacceptable. So they could reprimand us when needed. Marae now voluntarily support what we do. We've been in the game over 16 years. We've been around, we're a presence, and to the point where there was first sometimes skepticism, hesitation, releasing information online, notwithstanding the fact it was public already, was also seen as a big step. So yeah, navigating those sensitivities across the decade has been an interesting point of difference. It's also been guided by a philosophy. The philosophy is deeply embedded into the way we do things. It's actually governed the very way we turned up to marae physically, but also mapped them digitally. To the gate was an ethic or an ethos that is actually taken from Māori custom interactions. As we know them, they're called the pōwhiri. It's the idea where the boundary recognition is there. This is your home, you're the home people, and I can walk up to it and come here and go no further unless you welcome me across the threshold. Very custom in Māori is you wait until you're called onto the marae. And so we took that and framed our whole interactions, framed our website accordingly. We even host on our website, marae homes do not enter unless invited. That philosophical standpoint also meant that I had to manually take every GPS coordinate and drop them at the arbitrary or physical gate. So that was fun. It also governs what we upload to the website. You know, in some cases, marae were very eager to pass over imagery from inside meeting houses, where there were photographs of ancestors. Some were keen to give us, you know, lengths of information, data and kōrero, that, you know, to embellish their own domain. And in some cases, we had to say thanks, but no thanks. We never wanted to virtually recreate the marae space. We always wanted to act as a portal or to entice the user, the descendant, up to the gateway. And from there on, maybe they get their hands dirty, pick up a tea towel, and interact with the home community. So the purpose was also promote engagement and not get in the way, not to be a distraction. Speaking of data and the way we consider and what we consider data, Māori Maps is a repository for this information, but in no way have we ever claim ownership of it. It's a tricky stance because IP is a big thing within the digital space. You are FOSS4G, free and open source. So the way we've handled the situation and this ethic is to be a custodian of information. And we hold it in trust on behalf of the marae of Aotearoa, which becomes interesting when maybe the council, maybe at least 14 different governmental departments have asked us all for this information free. Even an iwi body saying, can we have all the contact information? So while at first we were finding new creative ways to tell people to jump in lakes, now we've changed our stance, and so long as our engagements benefit the marae directly, not us, but the marae, then, you know, we're open to more engagements that way. So in saying that, we adopted the idea that what we host is not IP, but IB, intellectual belonging. It's information in which descendants actually belong to. It's information where descendants could not necessarily themselves claim ownership of, but belong to. So it's a standpoint, a stake in the ground that gives us the sense that we're custodians only. And the last point I'll make here is reflects that sacred, restricted tapu space versus Noa. So FOSS4G operates in this Noa space. It's quite amazing to see how tribal values, tribal ideas can be navigated within this space of open access, and we're still figuring out our place in it. Where do we go? Well, one of our key ideas would be to create a layer of information that's freely available to be embedded in other people's website, maybe governments, maybe council, maybe your own, that respects those same values. So it might not necessarily be the entire suite of information we have, but it would be a way to have other websites or what have you pay homage to these sources of information. Once again, thank you to Simon, thank you to Alex, thank you to everyone who's made this happen. Ngā mihi kia koutou, and have a great conference, everybody.